call the meeting to order, I should say. I'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Man, we were all over the place on that one. All right. No public comment today. We have for approval of the October 11th, 2022 Public Safety Committee meeting minutes. Move to approve. We have a second. Motion made and second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion carried. Policy issues discussion and potential committee determination. We have none. 6, operational functions required by statute, ordinance, resolution, or policy. A, continued discussion of recommendations to executive committee for updates to strategies, objectives, and outcome measures found in the 2018-2022 strategic plan. So the reason we brought this up again is when we were discussing at the last executive committee meeting, there was some things that Lance had put in there, and then we were thinking, okay, we'll go back to these and make sure that our committee is okay with them. So just so everyone knows, 7.1 is it falls under the jurisdiction of the public safety. 7.1 does. 7.2 actually falls under the Health and Human Services. We're just the backup committee. And then 12.3 actually falls on the executive committee, but we can give recommendations to that. So that being said, I mean, if Lance wanted to add to that, he drafted these documents, as we know. I think we should be good, but if there's any further comments, we just want to know if there was any. So with that, I'll turn it over to the administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you did a fine job laying out actually why these documents are back in front of this committee. There's been no change in any of the documents that are in your packet. The only point that was added was, as you alluded to already, Objective 7.2. I thought it might be helpful for the committee to see some of the recommendations that were brought forward by the Health and Human Services Committee, and succinctly put, what they essentially did was really expanded the focus of that objective to the strategic plan beyond heroin and methamphetamines to drug abuse and alcohol abuse more broadly. They also captured, as did your committee, some of the things that we've accomplished, and you'll see some of those things are redlined out. But overall, you, as the chair referenced, you have 7.1 before you, which is under your committee's kind of oversight. 7.2 is under the direct oversight of Health and Human Service for monitoring for the strategic plan, but you are the support committee. And then 12.3, you had made some suggestions with respect to 7.1 that you asked be mirrored in 12.3, and specifically those related to strategies F and G, the Forensic Science Center, and the class compensation plan, so those, that's why that objective is before you as well. But no changes have been made since the documents were last before you.
And just one quick thing on 7.2, mitigate the impacts of, and they took out, like Administrator said, heroin and methamphetamine epidemics to drug and alcohol abuse. One of the reasons they brought that and changed that verbiage was, and if I recall this correctly, was because with the ever-changing things with drugs, so the latest and greatest, obviously, I'm sure everyone knows, is fentanyl. So because it changes so rapidly, it was thought that drug and alcohol covers all gamuts of the drug epidemic. So with that, I'll open it up to the floor if anyone has any questions, concerns, things they would like to see on either 7.1, 7.2, or 12.3. If not, this is basically, we're just an overview. We wanted to make sure that because it's on our, so just so people are aware, that we will be bringing this back up to the executive, and it's going to be for final draft then by, after Vice Chair McEwen goes through it and makes his draft to Administrator Leonard, and they'll get something to the executive committee to bring to the full board. All right, with that, we'll go to 7A, updates from the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. So I'll be the first one to say I have failed at this miserably because all the meetings are at 8 in the morning and I'm working. So I have not attended, I think I've attended 2 meetings, to be honest. Craig our Supervisor McEwen has gone to a couple for me. But other than that, I have not been on them, going to those as I probably should, but unless somebody's going to pay for my bills, I'm probably going to go to work. But that being said, I guess I'll turn it over to Administrator Leonard because he had some updates on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be rather brief. The minutes for all of these meetings are located on the same county website in the same form or fashion as all of the standing committees. You simply go to the calendar and you can see those. But I did think there were a couple of updates that would certainly be of interest to this committee. And Lori Yari is currently unable to be there. She may walk in to the meeting at some point, but she's addressing one of the things I'll be talking briefly about. But I want to go rather quickly. I have 4 updates. 2 things are things that were already in process. One update I have is something that I think is going to be interesting within our community. It's an update on something the Wausau Police Department, along with other law enforcement entities, are starting to look into. But I wanted to start with a bit of a positive update, which is something I always try to emphasize with our team. And that is at a recent statewide judicial conference event, the Chief Justice of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, Justice Roggensack, was speaking, and Judge O'Neill, the judge that serves as the chair of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, gave an update on the Chief Justice's comments, and she indicated that Marathon County got a bit of a shout out from the Chief Justice. It turns out that we have the second highest rate of case closures in terms of addressing our criminal caseload backlog from the pandemic in the entire state of Wisconsin. Waukesha County is the only county to have a higher rate for disposing of those cases. I think, if I'm being honest with all of you, the rest of the people in the meeting that day were rather surprised. I think we're also close to addressing a lot of the challenges that we face, that perhaps we don't see a lot of the positive progress that we have been making. Nevertheless, that's certainly a good thing to hear, and I wanted to bring that back to this body to let you know of that. But as you'll see from the rest of my updates, there are a lot of other things that the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council is working on, and a great many of them relate to a lot of the items that this committee takes a look at very frequently. So having dispatched with the positive update, I'll go to one of the informational updates, and this is really something that Lori Yari, our Justice Alternatives Coordinator, works very closely on. That's the pretrial program. And if you do go to the minutes or the packet information for the last CJCC meeting in the middle of last month, you'll see that there's an update. Really, it's data, a caseload breakdown for our pretrial program, and a little bit of context for all of the members, but particularly the new members. What pretrial case supervision is, it's assessment and supervision. So it's the use of an evidence-based tool, and that tool is called the Public Safety Assessment, to provide additional information to court professionals, prosecutor, the defense counsel, and the judges get this assessment, and it's to predict a couple of things. It's to give information on, one, a defendant's likelihood to return to court, and 2, their likelihood to reoffend. Those are 2 things that are very important when the court is making its initial bond decision, which, as I've shared with this committee in the past, is one of the most important decisions, if not the most important decision in terms of ultimate case outcomes for incarcerated defendants. So we got an update on kind of where we are with that pretrial program, and what we've seen is the numbers of people within that program have increased dramatically, and we do need to keep addressing kind of that case processing component of the justice system, which, again, this committee has talked about in previous sessions. It's talked about in this session. That's really one of the primary concerns that our Criminal Justice Coordinating Council and our case processing team look at. So pretrial, that data is in the packet for the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council meeting. Just another informational update. The reason Lori Yari is unable to be here, at least right now, is she's meeting with the Department of Justice, who just recently was able to hire for a data position that is aimed at evaluating the effectiveness of this pretrial pilot, because again, just for context, we're one of a handful of counties. I think it's either 7 or 8 counties in the state of Wisconsin that are utilizing this public safety assessment for purposes of pretrial case monitoring. And we were assured when we got into that pilot program that we were going to have assistance from the Department of Justice to do that data analysis. And that was several years ago. That hasn't panned out, but now we have heard that that individual has been hired. So we're looking forward to that. They're actually visiting today from 12 to 2. So they're over at a correctional services right now, as I understand it. The second piece that I wanted to talk about in terms of things that are underway really relates to some of the suggestions. One of the suggestions that this committee made relative to the strategic plan updates, and that's to address the attorney shortage. You just took a look at the suggestions you had previously offered, and one of those is that the Public Safety Committee would generate that white paper on how to potentially make some headway with attorneys, addressing the supply shortage of attorneys taking public defender and county appointed cases. So here are a couple of things that the case processing and criminal justice coordinating council are doing in that regard. First, I updated them on the conversations you had, saying that this was an issue that the county board through your committee wanted to address. Relative to case processing, we're doing some things trying to address the attorney appointment process, assuming that supply doesn't increase. I mean, we're hoping that we can find ways to get more attorneys willing to take more of these cases. But there are also things that the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council is doing to try to make it easier for attorneys to take those cases. And one of those is how we handle writs. So just a little bit of background to what a writ is if an individual is in custody somewhere other than Marathon County and they have a court case hearing for which they are ordered to appear, you need to execute a document. It's called a writ. It's a legal document signed by a judge ordering that individual be transported for that court hearing. Now, one of the things we learned through the pandemic is that we can do a lot more things virtually for court appearances than we have in the past. However, there are still things that we need to actually physically have the person come back to court for. So we identified that we were having a number of people come back to court unnecessarily. And that, of course, taxes the sheriff's office, who's responsible for doing those writs, jail staff for transporting the people. And, of course, it puts a bit more work on the shoulders of attorneys in that process as well. So what we tried to do to mitigate those unnecessary expenditure of resources is we made some changes to the way we capture minutes within our CCAP system. That's the system that captures what takes place during a court hearing to make sure that it was clear whether or not a writ would be required for that next upcoming hearing. So stated differently, the judge essentially is saying whether or not the person needs to be physically present for that next court hearing. And the district attorney's office is working to make some changes to their processes to make sure we're not requesting those unnecessarily. So that's one thing we're working on. The judges also set a policy relative to how to request a virtual hearing. So like I said, you can we had a lot of virtual hearings during the pandemic out of necessity, and the Supreme Court changed rules to make that easier for us to do that. However, when those kind of the strictures of the pandemic went away, we didn't necessarily continue to utilize virtual hearings in the same capacity. So the judges worked to clarify what the process would look like for a lawyer to request a virtual court appearance. And why that is important is because it might allow for lawyers outside of our community or even in our community to undertake and request a virtual hearing when they've met with their client. The issues for the hearing are relatively mundane, or it's not necessary for the person to be there. Essentially giving that lawyer one thing that the court sometimes takes from lawyers, which is time. You know, you spend a lot of time sitting in court waiting for your case to be heard, and then you do your court hearing. Allowing for that flexibility is something that the judge is working with Kelly Shrimp from the Clerk of Court's office have put in place a process for. And then the last thing in terms of ongoing work that I wanted to talk about, I think is really, it's of great interest to me, and that is working to decrease the amount of time between initial appearance for defendants, whether they're in custody or not. But right now we're going to focus on non-custody defendants and the appointment of counsel. So how it works currently is if I appear in court, I'm charged with a crime and I show up for my initial appearance, I learn of the charges that have been filed against me. I have the opportunity to, I'm in front of the judge, I hear about my right to attorney, and I'm provided information on how to reach out to the state public defender's office. Now, invariably, what happens very often is that I'm told that I need to go to the public defender's office by my pretrial conference, which is the next court hearing that's set. But invariably, a lot of defendants don't necessarily get there in a timely fashion. So they show up to their pretrial conference and they don't yet have a lawyer. Sometimes they don't even have the evaluation completed at the public defender's office to know if they're entitled to one. So what happens is cases don't, that pretrial isn't overly valuable. So what we're talking about doing, working with, this is something that District Attorney Whetstone, working with Kat Jackin from the Public Defender's Office, the local managing attorney from the Public Defender's Office, we're looking to do something similar to what we have done with some of our other justice alternative programs that we have that are provided through Attic Correctional Services. Historically, we had a similar program. People were ordered to go to Attic Correctional Services for certain programs to learn about their ability to get their license back, for example. They were ordered to report to Attic following their initial appearance, and we had that same problem. People, things happen in life and people don't necessarily get there in a timely fashion. So the change we made was we actually had Attic come to court. We had representatives from Attic sit in the back of the courtroom, and they would meet with people right immediately after they had their court appearance. So we're talking about doing the same thing with the public defender's office staff that can do those evaluations rather than have the people have to go from the courthouse to the state public defender's office. Let's just see if we can bring the public defender's office here to alleviate that potential for delay. We had a lot of success with that process improvement with Attic Correctional Services. I'm hoping we can find a way to bring the necessary resources to do a similar thing with the public defender's office, because I'm confident that it'll have significant improvement on our case processing results. Because, my hope is that we can add supply, get more lawyers that want to take public defender and county appointed cases. But if we can't, it behooves us to really do all we can to be as efficient in deploying those resources as possible. So just had a email correspondence with the public defender's office earlier this week. It's either late last week or earlier this week, as well as the district attorney's office. I'm very hopeful that this will be meaningful in helping us address some of those concerns. And then the last update, and I'll try to be brief here because it'll be in your minutes for, if you take a look at the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, we're learning more about what's called the PARI program. It's the Police Assisted Addiction and Recovery Initiative. The Wausau Police Department has been looking into this. They actually had several staff members travel to Plymouth County in Massachusetts to learn about the program. What it is it's targeted outreach to individuals within 72 hours of an overdose. So they are specifically targeting individuals that they've come to understand, become aware of, that have had an overdose on a controlled substance, much like Chair Boots just referenced. We've heard a lot about fentanyl. That's certainly been an issue here. We've had a record number of individuals overdosing. So we want to make sure we're aware of all those programs that are available. And the PARI program is something that the Wausau Police Department is learning more about. And we're seeing what that might look like in our community. It's a bit different in that it's really targeted, again, within 72 hours of overdose. And it's driven by recovery coaches as opposed to necessarily a law enforcement driven or a treatment driven initiative. So we're trying to learn more about that to be mindful of how we allocate our resources. So I believe the Wausau Police Department is going to get some more information. They're going to present to North Central Technical College, as well as our our fatality overdose review team that we have in Marathon County. But that's the new initiative that you might hear more about in the future, and talk about what resources we might need to bring as the county or we might be asked to bring as the county to address those issues. So that's really the most important updates that came from the last meeting. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions people might have.
Any questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Could you please repeat the acronym again? What police, what for PARI?
Sure. It's PARI. It's Police Assisted. And I just closed that window. So let me bring that up. Police Assisted Addiction and Recovery Initiative. PAARI. And they traveled to a county in Plymouth County in Massachusetts is where they were learning more about that program.
Okay, thank you.
Not a problem.
Further questions? All right, thank you, Administrator Leonard. With that, we'll move on to 7B. The reason I brought this forward, I'll be completely honest. We've been talking about bringing this back up. Vice Chair McEwen actually told me at some point we should revisit this, and it's been a little over a year and a half now, I figure. So we probably should bring it forward. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lance, because I'm going to learn today too. So.
I hope you're not overbilling what you're going to get from me. I don't know if I'm going to have any great insights, but thank you, Mr. Chair. As Chair Boots referenced, the special events policy is something that a number of supervisors may recall. It became an item of discussion, and I'll try to be brief, but it became a topic of discussion in 2019, essentially because staff from, for example, the sheriff's office or from the highway department were being asked by local nonprofit entities or just entities or individuals holding events to support those events through, for example, if I'm going to organize a marathon or a 5K, I might need some streets. I might want some highway barrels or some signage, or I might want law enforcement at an intersection. So we would get those requests. And as I've referenced in previous meetings with the entire board, county staff we are a very lean organization. We have a lot of required responsibilities that we do in accordance with our daily obligated work. This is really outside and above that. So in 2019, with former Administrator Carger, there was this discussion at the county board, what is our policy around those events? And through those discussions, we came to understand that we do have a large assembly ordinance, and I included that within your packet. It's the last several pages of your packet. It's a relatively long ordinance, section 12.04. And that's really related in some form and fashion, but they're not the same thing. We have these events, and the question that the county board was grappling with back in 2019 is, do we want to have a policy whereby county staff should pursue cost recovery, full cost recovery? That is, we charge for that assistance for those sort of events, or do we want to have a different approach? And the direction, the general consensus, as I understood it back in 2019, was we wanted to move to that full cost recovery approach, because there was a recognition that this is outside of kind of those traditional services that people would expect by virtue of their tax dollars, particularly given the fact that a lot of these events do charge a fee. If it's a marathon or triathlon or some other event, there is a fee for that sort of service. So that was the discussion that had started. The other piece that came about from that discussion was a discussion around section 12.04, which was put in your packet. And recently I asked for an opinion from Corporation Counsel, because when you look at that ordinance, it's very clear that there's a number of pieces of it that would need to be just factually updated. For example, it has the permit requests being reviewed by a committee, as opposed to what our standard practice is, that those are reviewed by staff. But nevertheless, the committee that's identified it hasn't existed for a great number of years. So there's some factual things that we would need to update. But apart from that, there's also some legal things that Corporation Counsel brought up that should be updated based on a Supreme Court case from a number of years ago that addressed a very similar ordinance from another county. And my sense on why they're very similar, I think all counties, very many counties adopted these sort of ordinances. And it makes logical sense for a lot of these ordinances. What you're talking about are large groups of people for large events that are congregating for a significant period of time, and they require things like a plan for fencing, a plan for parking, a plan for law enforcement or security, a plan for how you provide water to individuals and how you handle garbage, and toiletries. You know, all those things make sense when you're having, as our ordinance talks about, 3,000 people. It applies when there are 3,000 people in an area for 8 or more hours. I think there's a lot of logic underlying that ordinance that says, hey, you should have a plan. The organizer of this event should have a plan that's reviewed that addresses these things. So that's kind of how the conversation started in 2019, and it's evolved. So the request today, kind of the educational update today, is, as Chair Boots referenced, Chair McEwen has asked that this be kind of continued on the work plan. It's been on the work plan going back to 2019. It hasn't been prioritized, but it's on the work plan, and Chair McEwen wants to identify a strategy to make some headway on it. So I'm looking for volunteers from the 3 committees that really are most directly impacted by this ordinance. And those committees that we've identified at infrastructure were infrastructure, because of the work that the Highway Committee does. Public safety, because of course the Sheriff's Office is frequently requested to provide staffing for these sort of large events, or is likely to be requested. And then lastly, environmental resources, because we have permits that are handled currently for various events and conditional uses of property through the Environmental Resources Committee. So, as well as the fact that Parks the Parks Department works closely on these sort of analogous areas. So we do have, Chair McEwen has indicated that he is going to speak with Vice Chair of Infrastructure, Supervisor Dickinson. I am going to send out a communication to the ERC committee later this week to just ask if there's a volunteer. My sense is that we'll be able to make some headway on making modifications to this assembly ordinance relatively easily. It's not going to take an hour, but at the same time, it's not going to take, I don't envision this being a 40-hour project. There are a lot of things that we simply, as staff, I don't think it's an appropriate area for staff to weigh in on what the county board is going to ultimately regulate. For example, the size of the gatherings, what's regulated in various counties varies greatly. In Portage County, it's 300 people for 8 or more hours. La Crosse County, it's 1,000 people for 4 hours, triggers the ordinance. Kenosha, it's 5,000 people regardless of length of time, or between 100, if it's over 100 people, between midnight and 8 a.m. As I referenced before, our current ordinance is 3,000 people for a period of 8 hours. I don't think that's an area where staff really should be weighing in on, what is the appropriate place where regulation becomes applicable. I think having policymakers from the county board, a couple select policymakers from those 3 committees, would be helpful, because at the end of the day, it's really a policy question. What size of gathering do we want to regulate? What areas of the county are subject to regulation? That's an area we need to just simply legally clean up within the ordinance, Right now, the ordinance is written that it applies everywhere legally based on the authority you have as a county. You do not have the ability to regulate events taking place within incorporated municipalities. This would only apply in unincorporated areas of the county where that unincorporated town has not taken up regulation as well. So there's some clarifications we need to make in a number of areas where I think county board policymaker input would be very, very helpful. So that's the high level overview. I'm looking for a volunteer.
So before we,
I would be willing to hear. This is Supervisor Morash.
so before we get into that, I was going to ask that next. So thank you, Stacy. But the question I had is, so this is just going to be an advisory panel, and are they going to report to the executive committee, or are they reporting directly? Are you going to just have them help out staff create something and bring it to the full board, or how is this moving forward?
That's a great question. I think process is going to be something we'll have to talk about. There was discussion about whether or not we have a task force assigned or whether we simply operate under kind of a work group, from a work group perspective. And I think that's how we're going to approach it. And speaking with Corporation Counsel, he seemed to be supportive of that, as was the Infrastructure Committee. It shouldn't trigger any of the open meetings concerns that might otherwise be applicable. But to your point, we'd talk about where should this proposed ordinance go in terms of educational presentations, and ultimately for approval. You are correct, it would have to go to the county board. It is an ordinance. But whether that goes initially to infrastructure, public safety, perhaps a joint meeting of those, at least as it relates to the ordinance updates, that would be something that we'd have to discuss. The issue relative to cost recovery, I have to figure out how we want to have the county board take that issue up. Again, I think we had general consensus, as I understood it back in 2019, as when I was the deputy administrator. But certainly this board, if there's a different approach, we should incorporate that in some form or fashion into either the ordinance or a resolution, so that staff understand what the expectation is moving forward with these events.
Go ahead.
Just for reference, if you go to, on your iPad, go to county board meetings back in 2019, the resolution did not pass. It was postponed. And there is a guideline on the back of my copy, but there is a guideline after the resolution that shows you what we had addressed back then. It just gives you a little bit of history. So you just scan through and find it's resolution 7319. So go to that packet, and we just had the one meeting, so you only have one meeting to look at. But it does give information.
With that, I guess, is there any objection to having Supervisor Morash as the rep from this? Any objection? And Supervisor Morash, if you were not wanting to do that at some point, Supervisor Mask said she would. So at this point, Administrator Leonard, Supervisor Morash would be your candidate.
Sure. And if there are multiple people that are interested, certainly I think we can accommodate that. The only thing I'll have to give some thought to is if we do have start to get to any quorum sort of concerns, walking quorum concerns, we can make sure we address that appropriately. And ultimately, if there's a desire on the part of the full board or the executive committee to form a task force, we could go down that road. My next step is, once I have individuals that are interested, my plan is I'm in the process of formalizing my work plan for consideration by the executive committee and the full board. I'm going to put this on the work plan, and I can at least indicate that if it is prioritized, we have some of the groundwork laid to move forward, because I think that will at least position us to be effective and efficient. If this is a priority. If it doesn't kind of rise to the top in terms of what the priorities are for the board. We're probably going to be in the same situation that Supervisor Mask, Vice Chair Mask just referenced. This has been kind of on the back burner since 2019.
And just for clarification, Lance, Supervisor Mask would also like to be on there if it's possible.
Sure.
Okay.
I don't think that should be an issue. Thank you.
Okay. All right, with that, we're going to move on to 8A, next meeting date and time, location announcement, and future agenda items. So I did want to bring up one thing, and I'll probably be bringing this up at the next meeting. I'm going to talk with Supervisor Administrator Leonard, and also executive committee meeting. I feel it necessary that at some point, the budgeting process, we were, with the things we did with the budgeting process, I want to look into some of the things that were brought forward as far as amendments to the budgeting process that would affect what would have came out of our committee. Those would have been Amendment 2, 3, and 5. So 2 and 3 were just monetary cuts. If you look back at our agenda items, it was just monetary cuts brought forward by Supervisor Dickinson. And then number 5, I believe, was through Supervisor Dickinson also, and that was the nonprofits. So I feel it important we go through the things that were discussed and then were brought forward as amendments to the standing committee, basically. And those are the things I think we need to discuss. I'd like to hear from Judicare and Women's Community. That'll be something that I'll bring forward through Administrator Leonard. So I just want to make sure that since it's fresh in our brain with the budget process, I want to make sure we start looking at these things right away as to of things we could look at for the next budget process. So I'm sure I just caught blindsided Lance with this one, so he'll appreciate that.
I have a suggestion too. We've had the uniform addressing now for a while, so I am curious, has the addressing approved our locating? I know that we were still having issues, and are the address errors being corrected? I've heard that there were a few of them. I'm just curious how this is operating now, because of course I'm still getting a lot of complaints from people that they don't like it. Well, they don't like it, but that's not what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about, did we improve our emergency response?
So
And are the errors I know some of them had errors in the numbers themselves. So I'd like to know if this has been smoothed out, if it's made things more streamlined.
So you want to update with uniform addressing with no rainbows and unicorns, just the regular. So yeah, we want to hear how she wants to understand, and I'd like to actually hear too how it actually has done, if it's helped or improved, if not improved, where we're sitting with it now that it's been implemented. How many years has it been? 4 years?
Oh my God, it was before COVID. I don't know. I lost track of time, but it's got to be all of that.
How long ago was that, Administrator Leonard? Was it 4 years ago we did the uniform addressing, or was it 5?
It's longer than that.
Yeah, I think it's at least 4, but I suffer from the same affliction that Supervisor Mask referenced. I've lost all track of time with the pandemic.
Okay.
I can work with both Conservation Planning and Zoning and our Sheriff's Office to see what they would need in terms of time to put that presentation together, and we can clarify kind of what outcomes you'd like from that, other than I can appreciate kind of what has been the impact on emergency services response is the primary concern, and then correction of any addressing errors. But I can talk with CPZ and the Sheriff's Office on that.
And then also to what I said before, I can contact, if you could just send me through contact for both Judicare and the Women's Community, because I'd like to set up a presentation on that also.
Sure. I actually have a meeting with one of the nonprofits later this week, and we're sending out the 2023 contracts, so we can make sure that both the Judicare and the Women's Community and perhaps any other nonprofits that relate to public safety work can come and make presentations.
Go ahead.
This is Supervisor Morash.
Go ahead, Supervisor Marash.
Could we also have the NAACP, I believe it was called, because they help with housing for inmates that are recently released from jail?
We can certainly, We can certainly do that.
Thank you. And I have one announcement when it's appropriate.
Give me 1 second. I had Supervisor Masson. Go back to you, Supervisor Marash. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Masson.
I just want to recognize Teresa for her DA of the Year, I believe, award. Congratulations.
Congratulations. I didn't even know that. See, I'm out the loop.
Oh my gosh, that's quite an honor.
Go ahead, Supervisor Marash.
It's on the news.
Great minds think alike. That was exactly what I was going to say.
Sorry about that. It took away your thunder.
No worries.
Did you have something to say, Bruce?
I saw it on the news too.
I don't watch the news.
About
lately.
Teresa, I saw her on the news.
Perfect. Well, I think we're all happy that you got that because you do work hard. I'm fairly certain. So, I did see her driving home yesterday at 6:30, so I know it was a long day for her yesterday. All right, with that, next meeting is Tuesday, January 10th, 2023 at 1:30. And I guess everyone have a good Christmas. That's a long time before we'll see each other maybe at the board meeting, but. All right, with that, I'll take that motion to adjourn. Motion made to adjourn. Do I have a second? Second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion carried. Thank you, everyone.
Merry Christmas.
Yep, Merry Christmas.
Lance, are you in your office? You where? Oh,